Hello, my name is Servane, and this is a new episode on the series Repairing versus Building New Systems. What does a world post-COVID look like? Before we move to a new system, if we can, we need to look at the old world's leadership and infrastructure mistakes and maybe envisage new ways to communicate and engage with each other and learning our mistakes maybe, right? I'm asking a series of global leaders, innovators, activators, activists, what constitute repairing or building new systems for them, and suggestions to get started. And what happens is sometimes we learn a lot of things from people's journey. And today I like to welcome Hermina. Hermina, hello.
Hello, Servane.
And I'm so pleased that you come and join us today on the series. And I'm going to ask you, what is it that who you are, and what is it that you do in your day-to-day life before we delve into your journey?
Great. Well, I always find it difficult to start answering this question because I tend to start answering with my job, but I am certainly not just my job. But as it pertains to today's conversation, I am a Romanian national who's lived in London for the past 17 years. So I moved to London in 2004. I work in social impact investing. And I've worked in social impact investing for the past 4 years. Before that, I was in the city. So I had a transition from working in investment banking at the pointy end of investment banking with a very long hours that people hear about, and transitioned into social investment in 2018.
Wow. And do you have a specific remit within the social investing world at the moment, or something that things that particularly interest you?
So I started in most of my last 3.5, 4 years, I've been working on investing in social enterprises in the UK with a fairly broad remit, and working with charities that address the most vulnerable groups of people in the UK. So we're talking about people living in poverty, homelessness, people with mental health difficulties, escaping domestic violence. So there's two things, I suppose, that I learned along the way, or actually three. I've always been passionate about women's rights and women's involvement in economic activity, women's contribution to the investment of capital, and especially because I can see from the front line that women are entrepreneurial and they execute really well. So I have a lot of trust in an economy where women have more access to money and then they put it to good use. That's one thing. I think though the lessons that I learned from more recently regard systems and sort of the experience at the front line. So I was quite surprised coming from Romania, a former communist country, still, I suppose, described as a country in development, and coming into the UK, and which is a developed country, and witnessing the poverty and the inequalities. So that was quite a shock to me. So we can talk a bit more about what I think, how I think the systems kind of interact with that. So in a sense, I think we do take it for granted that the capitalist model, or, once you're in a developed country, it will sort of work for everyone. The rising tide lifts all boats. But this is not actually, I think, what the UK has experienced. It was rather an increase in polarization and inequalities.
Mm-hmm.
And the second lesson was that there tends to be a lot of experience and competence in the front line. So people with a lived experience, people who have experienced homelessness, are the best to find solutions for themselves, but they don't really tend to be listened to. They tend to be a bit patronized. So we have a number of people who place themselves as experts, and myself included. There is a lot of, I don't actually have some of the frontline experiences, but people assume that because they've had a certain education or experience in investment banking, they have answers to everything.
Okay. So there's a lot of insights there. Can we roll back a little bit to your early years like in Romania and how that I mean, there it's a life full of contrast. You just explained that it's not because you come into a sort of West European country that everything is in place, everything's fixed. There's a lot of disparity, a lot of contrast. From which contrast do you come from?
Well, I'll start with a segue. I know we talk a lot about systems change, and especially in impact investing, we talk about systems change. Yet I've heard a lot of skepticism about it. And I think particularly from people coming from countries and areas of the world that historically have been fairly stable, or at least, you know, since after the Second World War, there's this idea that the system is something pretty immutable. Whereas I come from Romania, where I've witnessed systems change firsthand. So when I was born, Romania was communist. And the regime was overthrown in 1989 when I was 9 years old. But I was old enough to actually remember, you know, an oppressive, authoritative, controlled economy, having ration cards for bread, and pretty much everything else. And then a sort of transition to an entirely different system. So I think for me, systems change is entirely possible. And absolutely, people's actions can lead to systems change. Because, you know, obviously the events that led to the fall of communism and the fall of the Berlin Wall, I think to a large extent, there was a lot of action, popular action that led to that. So I believe in systems change. I also feel that I've experienced a very supportive system thereafter. So at that point, there was a lot of foreign aid coming into Romania. There was a lot of there were a lot of opportunities that opened up. I will have to say the one good heritage of the way the country was organized, so I will not actually assign that to a system. It was a very strong education system and a strong focus on education. I think people don't really understand. I think in a lot of the Western world, the quality of the education that one might have access to is very linked to their financial resources. So therefore, if somebody lacks financial resources, people kind of assume, well, you couldn't have had a quality education. It's a bit of a blanket assumption, but there tends to be a sort of mental correlation between wealth and quality education. So therefore, when people think about poorer countries or developing countries or communist countries, they assume, oh, well, you know, they must also not be very well educated, which was not the case. So it was very focused, you know, there was the whole public library system, there was after school clubs, there was, I started learning English when I was 4 years old. There was, I find it a little bit, again, that was something I found quite confusing when I came to the UK, that people were surprised that I was well educated and I spoke good English. when for me it was actually quite normal where I came from. And secondly, so on that basis, that investment in education continued, and because of the opening of borders, because of, I suppose, the European integration enthusiasm and optimism that ensued after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And that was a very friendly environment. That was those that were, I suppose, up until I moved into the UK, and actually I will say up until 2016, for me, that was a system that supported mobility, that supported sort of cross-cultural integration. That was all we were talking about. So very early on, we started to have exchange teachers come into our school. So I went to a bilingual program where half my classes were in English. I went to the US when I was in high school for a congressional seminar, sort of learn about how the system, sort of political system works in the US. I did an exchange, an Erasmus exchange year at Nottingham. And I think people might be familiar with that. And unfortunately, at the moment, that program, I don't think it will be available between the UK and European countries any longer.
Something else, yeah, some other programs will come up, but that's an enormous piece of history that goes away.
Absolutely, absolutely. And for people who don't know what Erasmus is, or not who Erasmus was, for both. The Erasmus program was a student exchange program linked to, funded by the European Union. And it's not just about.
It still is in Europe.
Oh, yeah, it is in Europe.
And also part of the world, actually, funny enough. There are exchanges everywhere, yeah.
But I think that literally opened borders. It was easy to travel, and not only logistically, in that at that point I still had to get visas for every travel I took. When I was in university, actually, we took a 1-month interrail trip around Europe with my colleagues, and it was a great adventure. And these were all opportunities that opened up to students from Romania who were not very wealthy, but who, on the other hand, spoke several foreign languages, were dynamic, were well educated, and we were given a platform. We were given open doors that we could just move on. And so I think that was a great. It was not just the local system, it's almost like the global system, or at least the European system. And that was an international mentality that was supportive of, well, it was welcoming to Eastern Europeans, and to this idea of multiculturalism. And that, of course, started to take a hit in sort of 2016, 15, 16 onwards. So for me, it was, people talk about the self-made man. And, when people describe their journeys, they sort of talk about how hard they've worked and how, how much they studied and absolutely, I did all of that. And I studied, and but without the opportunities to actually, I took a GMAT test and I went to study in Norway, and from there I was recruited into an investment bank in London, and this is how it all happened. Yeah. But if I wasn't allowed to leave the country, which was the case under communism, or if I wasn't allowed to come and work into the UK, none of that hard work would have brought me here.
It's the same for British people as well, or other, anywhere else. Systems and contexts do define a lot of the trajectories, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, so to link it to the second surprise, actually quite shocked that I had when I had it in the UK, when I came to the UK, it was this polarity and inequality. It was Christmas Day or Christmas Eve. My parents were visiting my first year here, and we were walking to Trafalgar Square, and there's a church there on the left,
Yeah.
and we saw a couple, a fairly young couple, with some bags of belongings in the arch of the church, clearly quite distressed. And I think it was just incomprehensible for my parents, who, my parents were born shortly after the war and grew up in communist Romania. And for them, seeing homeless people on Christmas Eve in London was the shock of their trip. I mean, they could not comprehend that. For me, what is continued to be a very baffling subject is the lack of social mobility. In a way, I feel that there was, because of the the strength of the education system in ex-communist Romania, the opening of the borders, and therefore a helpful, friendly, welcoming mentality European-wide. And along with it, there came funds, there came access to student loans, which on helpful terms. So a combination of that led to me being quite mobile, geographically, and just basically I had the tools to design my journey. Whereas I think I used to say, I think it was easier for me to get from Northwest Romania to the city of London than it is for many of the kids in Bethnal Green to get to the city.
Wow, wow, wow. So
And
yeah, so it's not just a matter of sheer luck. There is a circumstantial elements that need to be taken into account, the systems and how the system is organized somehow in the background will give you the tool to move up or sink.
And I think the question is, why should anybody sink?
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody should sink, because that's a slightly separate subject, which again has a lot to do with assistance. And I do think that the current system, unfortunately, is predicated on the sink or swim.
So Nina, tell me, next Monday, 8 o'clock, some people are going to go back or log back in to their office, a virtual office space, or go into a real office space if they can, if they want to, if they can. How can you, what is it that you would encourage them to do, feel, or think about in order to be actors of a system that enable people to move around, move up?
So I do think that the very first step is awareness, and awareness of our own privilege.
Yeah.
And I feel, unfortunately, and I include mine as well, and I'm hoping that it came across. I do feel very privileged in so many ways. I also feel that, I had lived experience of living in an oppressive regime, of not, not having any access to wealth, like for any time, and in my youth, and traveling and changing countries. But unfortunately, especially, I sense that a lot of my peers, I will say, I tend to be very sensitive whenever I even mention privilege. And I think people tend to become defensive, and they feel accused and attacked. And that's not a helpful attitude. So I will go up and raise my hand and say, I am very privileged, and I own that. And by owning and recognizing my privilege, that allows me to develop compassion for people with less privilege, and to see the ones who don't have my privilege, and kind of think, what can I do, either a little bit individually, or what can I do in my work? And by privilege, I mean people expecting their Deliveroo meal to come up to their door, people expecting their Amazon package to be delivered within 24 hours.
There's a system behind it that makes it happening, and not everybody's granted a good life there. It's just by necessity. They have to work there, right?
Absolutely. And not thinking about the people who are delivering their meal, or the Amazon driver who can't have bathroom breaks. And, so I think the reality is, I think when we have privilege, with great power comes great responsibility. I think if I should encourage people to think a bit like a superhero, like, what do you do with that? Because the reality is that maybe we can shift from a mentality of entitlement to a mentality of responsibility. I think it's not a big deal. Like, I know everybody likes deals and meal deals and wants to get value for money, but if you kind of think in the context that if you're able, like at the very small level, if you're able to pay £15 for a dinner for somebody who probably like earns a lot less than that per hour, then you can tip another.
Yeah.
That's at the very small level. And the next level is just remember everyone's humanity. I had amazing conversations with Uber drivers who were, a doctor in Eritrea, or I think remembering that thing, it's, and this is really, again, it makes me reflect a lot about a lateral subject with it, which is how do we treat migrants and refugees. And I think so my story of system change in Romania was a positive one. It opened doors for me, and it allowed me to design a life that I really enjoy. Well, think about somebody living in Syria in 2010. That system change was not a positive.
Yeah, because it's still not over. Yeah.
But that's what I mean. So living in Syria in 2010, you could be a doctor in a middle class family, and actually Damascus was an amazing city for tourism. I actually know. And the thing is, when we look at refugees and migrants and Uber drivers, and I think we underestimate the amount of skills that they're actually bringing over. I was reading something recently about, well, actually, I was reading Catherine Marsal's Who Cooked Adam Smith's Dinner, and I think she's talking about the nursing staff and the shortage of nursing staff in sort of the UK and the US. And what people don't appreciate is that a lot of the foreign nurses that they see are retrained doctors.
So not only that, they don't not just have the technical skills, but they bring as well a wealth of knowledge, cultural knowledge, and understanding, which could be valuable when they treat patients, or when they interact with local people who themselves might have a different kind of background. So the questions you ask yourself are not necessarily the question you ask yourself when you haven't had that much interaction with other cultural backgrounds, right?
Absolutely. So, back to that, I would think what will change the world, in my view, is a belief in systems change, the belief that we can change it in a way. I kind of want everybody to remember it. Well, the system is something we made up. It's a set of conventions we made up.
It's never broken. It always is what it is right now. It doesn't suit you, it suits you, or it suits someone else, or not. But there's no brokenness in this. It is what it is.
And we made the rules. We can change the rules. And I think that what rules do we want to live by? If we remember everybody's humanity and develop an awareness of our own privilege, I think the rules will develop out of that. I think I'll just leave it there. I think I could. I'm thinking I'm almost starting a lecture now.
But I think I really want to thank you and acknowledge your authentic account of your journey, your thoughts, and what I take away from that is not is that we live in a binary world. It's much more complex than that, and bringing more humanity and understanding and awareness might help in changing things for the better. And we don't have to change the world by, this weekend, 8 o'clock. We can, operate through small incremental changes and see how ripple effects of goodness, right?
Absolutely. I absolutely advocate every little helps. I'm not helping Tesco here. But the other thing that I hear people saying, oh, well, I can't make, change the world in a day. No, but every little action and actually starting to be nice to people
Can help.
pays. Yeah.
Does go a long way. Thank you so much, Hermina. It was a pleasure having you on this series. Thank you.
Very much.